Welcome back, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that the US has the makings of a deal with China ahead of a tariff truce deadline of August the 12th. Meanwhile, global markets have jolted after dozens of nations were hit with steep tariff rises, as Canada says a deal could be weeks away. Donald Trump has again confirmed that sanctions will be placed on Russia if there is no peace deal with Ukraine by his deadline. Meanwhile, Russia says that 3 people have died in Ukrainian strikes on the country. This comes as US President Donald Trump says he's positioned 2 nuclear submarines in response to war threats from Russia's former president. Trump and Dmitry Medvedev have traded taunts in recent days. Protests have taken place in countries including the US, UK and South Africa as fighting continues in the Gaza enclave. The United States has promised a new Gaza food program, while the Hamas-run Gaza Civil Defense says Israeli fire has killed 22 further Palestinians. President Trump has fired a top Labour official accusing her of falsifying weak jobs data without evidence. The move, along with a Fed resignation and tariff turmoil, has sent markets plunging as Trump again called for Fed Chair Jerome Powell to resign. A gunman opened fire at a bar in Anaconda, Montana, killing 4 people. Police have identified the suspect as a local military veteran with a manhunt ongoing. Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo have agreed on the outline of an economic framework as part of a wider peace deal. Rwandan-backed M23 rebels and the DRC military have been involved in deadly clashes, displacing large numbers from the eastern DRC region. And NASA's SpaceX Crew 11 has successfully docked at the International Space Station after an express 15-hour flight. 4 members of the Crew 10 mission could return from the ISS as early as Wednesday. But we start this hour with a key update on U.S. China trade talks as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Washington sees the makings of a deal with Beijing. Talks held this week in Stockholm made progress and Bessent expressed optimism about the path forward. According to reports, Bessent confirmed the deal isn't final, but noted strong US pushback during the talks. China faces an August 12th deadline to strike a lasting tariff agreement with the Trump administration. Earlier deals in May and June helped cool tensions over tariffs and rare earth exports. Talks continue amid rising trade pressure. Well, of course, this in the midst of wider tariff action. Steep tariffs applied to multiple countries after the initial August 1st deadline, but this, of course, is separate for China after talks that were held in Geneva and then London, both the US and China agreeing to a trade truce, which swapped triple-digit tariffs on each country down to far lower rates. General rhetoric between the US and China has also improved in recent times. Provocative language turned into more of a unity between the 2 leaders, Trump and President Xi, both talking about a potential visit in that instance where Trump and his wife Melania, the First Lady, would both go to China. That is still not to be confirmed, though the offer is there. The situation now, of course, a trade deal is needed. The tariffs at the rate that they were, of course, hugely impactful. China is a massive exporter of technology, rare earths. In return, of course, the US, an exporter of multiple different goods, food, stock, but also other areas that are key like oil. And this all blew up initially after a threat of tariffs before Trump had even started his second term in office. A question raised about fentanyl trade as well, with many of the chemicals that are used in the production of fentanyl coming from China. But it seems that there are at least movements towards positivity. And joining us now to discuss that, Andrew K.P. Leung, a China strategist, joining us live from London. Andrew, thank you for being with us. Is there optimism from a Chinese perspective of a deal that both countries can be happy about?
Well, of course, it is a very complicated issue. On the one hand, it's not just about fentanyl, because even though some of the supply comes from China, but then the transit passes through Mexico and other drug, infused countries, maybe in the southern border of the United States, and some coming even from Canada. So fentanyl is not the main issue. The main issue is the confrontation of the United States against China's rise, particularly technology, but also trying to rebalance the trade. Now, as the balancing the trade is concerned, Trump thinks the tariffs is a very powerful weapon with the possibility of bringing some jobs back to the United States and bringing a lot of revenue. But on the other hand, it's going to translate into higher costs for American consumers. So that's one side of the equation. And the other side of the equation, as far as China is concerned, China is pivoting to the south, to the global south. And you look at the trade statistics, even during the height of the tariffs war, China's export has actually increased because it's compensated more by China's pivot to the global south. But the critical issue is, of course, China just doesn't want more trade or resumption of normal trade. China wants a lifting of some of the restrictions against China's access to critical chips, the semiconductor chips, from 3 nanometers and below. And there are huge restrictions there, and China's still not able to replace that. But on the other hand, China's also found a stranglehold against the United States unilateralism. And the stranglehold is rare earths, as I explained earlier in these channels, because China controls 95% or even more of the production of these rare earths. And they found their use in lots of products, ranging from mobile phones to various gadgets, and also to the military armament, including F-35 fighters. So I think that both sides need to negotiate on these critical issues that characterize the relationship, but it's not likely to be resolved anytime soon.
Yes, Andrew. Let's look at the imbalances that have been spoken about previously. Donald Trump said that China produces too much and the US consumes too much. Looking to get that shifted, do you think that that will be a part of any deal that is done?
This is really spot on because China has been just expanding its production in order to create jobs, in order to bring back revenue. And that's been going on not just this year, but tracing back to when Deng Xiaoping opened up the country and embraced the international trading system by joining the WTO and so on. Now, all this has been going on quite well in the relationship between the United States and China, because the United States wanted to wanted to outsource a lot of the polluting industries, a lot of the cheap stuff that didn't make much money, because say a mobile phone produced in China by Apple, the United States patents and the technology reaped about something like 90% of the value of a mobile phone, leaving about 10% or even less to the Chinese. But then, of course, China is now increasing its innovation and technology, is now even threatening the dominance of Apple phones, and of course in green energy cars. It's decimating a lot of the industry pillars in the West. So I think that there needs to be a rebalance there by China perhaps moving some of the production to the host countries and to create jobs and to bring benefits to the local economy. But on the other hand, China also needs to open up more of its market, because there was an accusation of lack of market reciprocity, whereas the China products find easy penetration in Western markets, in Europe and the United States. The same cannot be said of the China market. So China needs to also open up more of its market space for Western investors and Western businesses. Well, this has been done, of course, but not quite enough in the eyes of countries like the United States.
Yes, and Andrew, before we move on, very briefly, do you think that this sort of improving relationship between the US and China, specifically surrounding trade, has a risk of snapping back to where it was, with tariffs once again going into triple digits? Or do you think this is now a framework that can be followed at least until the end of Donald Trump's second term?
This is peculiar to China and the United States, because the United States can feel that it can impose its will, the American first rules of the jungle on most other countries, even to a certain extent, European Union, perhaps not so much Canada, and also on Australia, and definitely to the poor countries in Latin America, in Africa. But that cannot be said for China. As I said, China's found a stranglehold that really goes into the heart of the American economy and also its military, as I explained, by restricting access to rare earths. So I think that this is a lot of toing and flowing there. But I think that both sides, both the United States and China, realize that they cannot really sustain this game of the chicken, because both sides are not going to back down. And then this paved the path for a more calibrated and nuanced relationship. And yes, I think this is likely to be defined by the visit of President Trump to China. He has already expressed a strong wish, and also by the possibility of President Xi giving a reciprocal visit to the United States on Mar-a-Lago to celebrate Trump's birthday, perhaps, next year. So I think that we are only seeing some green shoots. There are lots of discussions going on, and both sides are trying to test each other's will. But I think the direction is there. But that direction may not translate easily for other countries, because no other country is in the same strong negotiating position as in China.
Andrew, as always, thank you so much for your insights. We will continue to monitor all of those developments between the US and China relating to trade. But now we move to Africa. And Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo have agreed on an outline for the regional economic integration framework, that according to the US State Department. This comes as the two countries take steps towards delivering on a peace deal signed in Washington earlier in June. According to a statement from the US State Department, the framework tenets include elements of cooperation on energy, infrastructure, mineral supply chains, national parks and public health. Rwanda and the DRC had signed a peace deal in June, which was mediated by the Trump administration, which aimed to bring an end to fighting that has killed thousands. The deal also aimed to attract billions of dollars of Western investment to a region which is rich in tantalum, copper, gold, lithium and cobalt. As part of the deal signed in June, Kigali and Kinshasa had agreed to launch a regional economic integration framework within 90 days. Reportedly, a preliminary draft of the framework has been agreed to and is planned to be signed at a meeting of heads of state at the White House. However, no date has been set for that meeting. Well, joining us to discuss the situation, Dr. Levi Ndu, a political analyst who's joining us from Johannesburg in South Africa. Thank you ever so much for your time. Of course, an area in Africa that had seen fighting escalating with thousands of deaths potentially and lots of displacement as well. How big of a milestone is this economic framework, given that, of course, it comes months after that initial peace deal was signed?
Greetings to you, Joshua. Greetings to the viewers at home. This is a remarkable milestone in the sense that the conflict in the DRC has taken some time in which it was quite difficult to resolve. It has also taken a number of other countries, especially in the South African development community, to also participate and get involved. A lot of lives have been lost, and there were people who had lost hope that there will never be peace in the eastern part of the DRC. These developments, it's a triumph for diplomacy, it's a triumph for peace in that region. It is also a milestone that will see the citizens of both the DRC and Rwanda living together peacefully and indeed coming up with initiatives to develop their own region. And that will benefit all the citizens. That for me is exactly what is expected. It is what we need to see happening with many other countries.
So, and Dr. Ndu, of course, we mentioned their potential Western investment. Do you think that's a potential reason for US involvement, given the amount of rare earth minerals that are currently in the east of the DRC?
At this stage, what is primary is to ensure that the conflict has to come to an end. Whether the peace is brokered by the US or any other person, I think what is central now is that there is peace. We're not going to see the loss of lives. We're not going to see people being relocated from one place to the other. What could be a challenge would be the integrities on how they develop that region. But that for me will require them making sure that they're able to cooperate, that they're able to put personal interest behind and put the interest of all the people forward. And that, in my view, it's what we expect, and we expect to see as much progress as possible in that regard.
Absolutely. Dr. Ndu, thank you ever so much for taking the time to provide that unique insight. And of course, your time as well. It's a topic of conversation we will continue to monitor as peace moves closer. But moving on now, negotiations for a US-Canada trade deal remain unresolved and could take weeks, that according to Ottawa's chief negotiator. This development follows US President Donald Trump's recent executive order raising tariffs on Canadian imports from 25% to 35% on products not covered by the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, also known as the USMCA. The tariffs affect critical Canadian sectors including steel, aluminium and automobiles, despite over 90% of Canada's exports entering the US duty-free. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney emphasised the need to reset bilateral relations, condemning the tariffs as disruptive to long-standing trade and security ties. Federal Minister Dominic LeBlanc, responsible for US trade relations, reaffirmed Canada's position to accept only a beneficial agreement and highlighted ongoing talks aimed at resolving key sectoral disputes. The Trump administration also expressed dissatisfaction with Canada's refusal to remove countermeasures initially imposed under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who resigned in March and was succeeded by Mark Carney. Trade experts and business leaders in Canada have voiced concern over the stalled negotiations and the economic risks posed by the ongoing tariff conflict. Well, this, of course, a situation that has toed and froed Mark Carney and Donald Trump meeting at the G7 summit. And at that point, there was optimism that a deal could be done before the deadline. That doesn't seem to be the case. And, of course, scepticism as to whether that will be done in time has now turned into a reality. And now concern as well that a deal might take weeks to be completed. But the situation is not as direct as some other countries. Of course, there is the Canada, Mexico, US deal and an agreement that is in place, and that does see duty-free exports in certain areas. So the situation is, of course, complex. And joining us to discuss that is Sharad Kohli, an economist joining us live from New Delhi. Sharad, thank you for your time. We mentioned there, of course, that the responses from Canada, the fact that it might take weeks for another deal to be done. But can you tell us specifically how this new rates will impact Canada and the United States, both from a business perspective but also from a consumer perspective?
I think they're going to be detrimental for both the countries, and Canada has been against this deal, against the tariffs from the beginning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
So Canada has been against the tariffs from day one, and Mark Carney has been very clear on that, and there was some improvement as compared to when the change of government happened. But then Canada was very categorical, and I'm surprised at the U.S. because Canada is, Mexico and Canada are two of the largest partners, trading partners of the U.S. And for U.S. to be doing this to Canada and trying to dictate terms with Canada, I think Canada doesn't seem to be succumbing to it. I mean, each country's sovereignty has to be respected, and the country has a right to decide on the structure of its economy. The structure of each economy is very, very unique. We should not forget that Canada has a population of little over 30 million, whereas America's population is far higher. It's more than 300 million for that matter. So there's a stark difference between the economies of the two countries, between the population of two countries, between the economic size of the two countries. So I think when a bilateral deal happens, you have to respect each other's size, the structure, the requirements. And I personally feel that deals cannot be done under force. You cannot bully somebody for a deal. And that's what is the bone of contention between America and Canada, as it is like in case of America and India, as it is like in the case of so many other countries to whom letters have been issued at very high tariffs. So eventually, I think America will have to understand, and of course, there are two other factors which are counting on America's mind. One is recognition of Palestine by Canada, and of course, Greenland was another issue which was being spoken of. And then let's not forget that America wanted Canada to be the 51st state. So, with those kind of very, very strange responses coming from the U.S. and very, very, very freak remarks coming from the U.S. over a period of time, I'm sure the Canadian people, the Canadian government, whichever party it may belong to, is not very happy. So this might take some time to settle down because the size of trade between the two countries is humongous. So no, both the countries cannot afford to let this situation remain in a stalemate.
Yes, absolutely. And Sharad, let's look now at the politics behind this. Of course, you've mentioned the key players there, but there was rhetoric from Donald Trump ahead of the Canadian election talking about making Canada the 51st state and also several other points which Canadian people didn't enjoy hearing relating to sovereignty and other matters. Do you think that has played a part in some of Trump's actions at all?
Well, Trump's actions have been a mix of politics and trade. He is a businessman. He's a hardcore businessman. We all know that. I think when he does a deal, I can cite you an example. When it came to the Indian tariffs, which he levied 25%, he mixed up two things. He says partly it's because of the trade deficit we have with India, and partly is also because India is a member of BRICS. India is importing oil from Russia. India is importing defense equipment from Russia, which is killing so many people in Ukraine and so on and so forth. So President Trump does try to mix trade with politics, but I have my doubt because he's a hardcore businessman. So from inside, I feel that he's purely keeping the deal considerations in mind. But what fails to, what I fail to understand here is that can America, in a situation where these deals do not go through, in a situation where these goods for example, from Canada, they land up in America, and practically, from Canada, America is importing practically everything, from fruits and vegetables to some very high-tech stuff as well. So when these goods land in America, they're going to be expensive for the American people. Inflation is going to get fueled from here. So how is America going to handle that situation is what I fail to comprehend, because this is a kind of, I call it as a self-destructive move, because you're trying to harm your own economy. Of course, first you harm the exporters of the other country, but then at the end of the day, if you continue importing at these tariffs, your treasury may be able to collect some more revenue. But then what about the American people? I think those people will have to ultimately consume the goods at higher prices. Or option two is that you start manufacturing these goods within your country, which is not possible because the cost of production in the US and the cost of cultivating them in the US is so high that US people or US consumers will not be able to afford that. That is something which I'm finding hard to digest. And I hope in the coming weeks, this grim reality is going to come to the ground when I think President Trump is going to understand that he may be trying to make America great again, MAGA as they say, but in the process, he might end up making America expensive again as it was after COVID.
Sharad Kohli, thank you ever so much for your time and that insight. Let's move on now. And a US appeals court has upheld a temporary ban on federal immigration arrests in Los Angeles without probable cause. The court rejected the Trump administration's request to pause the order, stating that arrests based on appearance, language or location likely violated constitutional rights. This comes as earlier protests against immigration raids had taken place in Los Angeles after ICE officials had raided several city locations to arrest individuals allegedly involved in illegal immigration to the United States. The Civil Liberties Union and several Southern California cities had sued federal agents, accusing them of racial profiling and unlawful tactics. The court agreed, blocking arrests based solely on race, ethnicity or speaking Spanish. LA Mayor Karen Bass called the ruling a victory, while the ACLU said it confirms the administration's actions were unconstitutional. Let's move to South America now, and in Brazil, a top Supreme Court Justice, Alexandre de Moraes, is pushing back against US sanctions. Moraes said he will continue doing his job and ignore the sanctions. This comes as the US imposed penalties this week, accusing Moraes of suppressing free speech and authorizing arbitrary arrests. These claims are tied to his oversight of the trial against former President Jair Bolsonaro, charged with plotting a coup to overturn the 2022 elections. Moraes says the court won't bend to foreign pressure. He compared the sanctions to a new wave of attempted coups by Bolsonaro's allies. Let's now take a listen to what the Brazilian Supreme Court judge has said.
As ações prosseguirão. O rito processual do Supremo Tribunal Federal não se adiantará, não se atrasará. O rito processual do Supremo Tribunal Federal irá ignorar as sanções praticadas. Esse relator vai ignorar as sanções que foram aplicadas e continuar trabalhando como vem fazendo.
Well, joining us live from the newsroom is my colleague Asuma Kotoka, anchor and correspondent with NewsX World. Asuma, could you provide some context on this for us, please?
It's very interesting to see how this the trade war that involved not only current presidents of United States and President Lula da Silva of Brazil, but also includes the former President Bolsonaro, who is now fighting a case because he is said to have attempted a coup against while his election loss of 2022 against the current president Lula da Silva. And the current president Lula da Silva and President Donald Trump has had a bit of riff in recent months, starting in May, when President Lula da Silva sent a formal letter talking about trade tariff, which was never responded officially by President Trump's administration. And now apparently President Lula da Silva as well as President Trump has said that they are open to dialogue, and Lula da Silva openly expressed that he is also open to dialogue. But it's interesting that both of them did not mention what was happening throughout this tariff war, tit for tat kind of situation that went on and on. Something that we still remember, it's fresh in our minds, is when Lula called President Trump, not directly, but saying that we are not going to take any orders from a foreigner in his speech, and during his speech. And also Brazil is Brazil has said that it's ready for a counter tariff, 50%. If US puts 50%,
yes, Asuma,
Brazil...
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Sorry to interject there, but thank you for that insight on trade. Of course, this also relating to those sanctions that the US has placed on the Supreme Court judge relating to that Bolsonaro trial, and that's something we will continue to monitor here on NewsX World. But that is all we have time for. For all of the rest across the international sphere, make sure to follow us here on NewsX World.